as though he were walking beside a person in perfect health. As the plague prevailed to a considerable extent throughout the valleys of the Lebanon, we were frequently obliged to go some distance out of our way to avoid the villages affected with the scourge. We usually encamped for the night in the open fields, far from any habitation. On the whole long distance from Baalbek to the cedars of Lebanon, we found not a human habitation, excepting a little shepherd's hut near the mountains. Not more than a mile and a half from the heights we came upon small fields of snow. Several of our attendants dismounted and began a snowballing match, a wintry scene which reminded me of my fatherland. Although we were travelling on snow, the temperature was so mild that not one of our party put on a cloak. We could not imagine how it was possible for snow to exist in such a high temperature. The thermometer stood at 9° Reaumur. A fatiguing and dangerous ride of 5 hours at length brought us from the foot to the highest point of Mount Lebanon. Here, for the first time, we can see the magnitude and the peculiar construction of the range. Steep walls of rock, with isolated villages scattered here and there like beehives and built on natural rocky terraces, rise on all sides. Deep valleys lie between, contrasting beautifully in their verdant freshness with the bare rocky barriers. Farther on lie stretched elevated plateaus, with cows and goats feeding at intervals, and in the remote distance glitters a mighty stripe of bluish green, encircling the landscape like a broad girdle. This is the Mediterranean. On the flat, extended coast several places can be distinguished, among which the most remarkable is Tripoli. On the right the grove of cedars lay at our feet. For a long time we stood on this spot, and turned again, for fear of losing any part of the gigantic panorama. On one side of the mountain range, with its valleys, rocks, and gorges; on the other side the immense plain of Kalosira, on a verge of which the ruins of the Sun Temple were visible, glittering in the noontide rays. Then we climbed downwards and upwards, then downwards once more, through ravines and over rocks, along a frightful path, to a little grove of the far-famed cedars of Lebanon. In this direction the peculiar pointed formation which constitutes the principal charm of these mountains once more predominates. The celebrated grove of cedars is distant about 2 miles and a half from the summit of Lebanon. It consists of between 500 and 600 trees; about 20 of these are very aged, and 5 peculiarly large and 5 specimens are said to have existed in the days of Solomon. One tree is more than 25 feet in circumference. At about 5 feet from the ground it divides into 4 portions, and forms as many good-sized trunks. For more than an hour we rested beneath these ancient monuments of the vegetable world. The setting sun warned us to depart speedily, for our destination for the night was above 3 miles away, and it was not prudent to travel on these fearful paths in the darkness. Our party here separated. Count Zischi proceeded with his attendants to Huma, while the rest of us bent our course towards Tripoli. After a hearty leave-taking, one company turned to the right and the other to the left. We had hardly held on our way for half an hour before one of the loveliest valleys I have ever beheld opened at our feet. Immense and lofty walls of rock, of the most varied and fantastic shapes, surrounded this fairy vale on all sides. In the foreground rose a gigantic table rock, on which was built a beautiful village, with a church smiling in the midst. Suddenly the sound of chimes was borne upwards towards us on the still, clear air. They were the first I had heard in Syria. I cannot describe the feeling of delicious emotion this familiar sound caused in me. The Turkish government everywhere prohibits the ringing of bells, but here, on the mountains, among the free Maronites, everything is free. The sound of church bells is a simple, earnest music for Christian ears, too intimately associated with the usages of our religion to be heard with indifference. Here, so far from my native country, they appeared like links in the mysterious chain which binds the Christians of all countries in one unity. I felt, as it were, nearer to my hearth and to my dear ones, who were, perhaps, at the same moment, listening to similar sounds, and thinking of the distant wanderer. The road leading into this valley was fearfully steep. We were obliged to make a considerable detour around the lovely village of Bishari, for the plague was raging there, which made it forbidden ground for us. Some distance beyond the village we pitched our camp beside a small stream. This night we suffered much from cold and damp. The inhabitants of Bashari paid us a visit for the purpose of demanding bakshish. We had considerable difficulty in getting rid of them, and were obliged almost to beat them off with sticks to escape from their contagious touch. The practice of begging is universal in the East. So soon as an inhabitant comes in sight, he is sure to be holding out his hand. In those parts where poverty is everywhere apparent, we cannot wonder at this importunity, but we are justly surprised when we find it in these fruitful valleys, which offer everything that man can require, where the inhabitants are well clothed, and where their stone dwellings look cheerful and commodious, where corn, the grapevine, the fig and mulberry tree, and even the valuable potato plant, which cannot flourish throughout the greater part of Syria on account of the heat and stony soil, are found in abundance. Every spot of earth is carefully cultivated and turned to the best account, so that I could have fancied myself among the industrious German peasantry. And yet these free people beg and steal quite as much as the Bedouins and Arabs. We were obliged to keep a sharp watch on everything. My riding whip was stolen almost before my very eyes, and one of the gentlemen had his pocket picked of his handkerchief. Our march to-day had been very fatiguing; we had ridden for 11 hours, and the greater part of the road had been very bad. The night brought us but little relaxation, for our cloaks did not sufficiently protect us from the cold. Section 25